Morning. Sorry we're running late. It's a holiday weekend. It's the first day of Advent. So I wish you all a very happy Advent. How are we feeling this morning? Anybody grieving? Angry? Despondent? Linda.
Killed my daughter's temper tantrum about an hour ago.
Excuse me.
I'm finding that the older that I get, the less I care about. I mean, I wanted my team to win. I don't care. I don't know. I care. It's nice. And I think this year, too, the absurdity of it all really hit me in a profound way. Like, so let's say goodbye to a coach and pay him $37 million to say goodbye to him, only to have to hire someone from home. There might just be too much money. We might be putting too much importance on this game. That's possible. It's possible. It's possible. Yeah. It's possible. So, today we are doing beginning a 2-week series, just this week and next week, and I've got a little handout here if you didn't grab them. They're right here. Come get them. If you got them, great. If not. And I wanted to talk about holiness. So when you hear that word holiness, what comes to mind for you? What do you think holiness is?
Well, holiness always links to divinity.
Okay. Holiness links to divinity. Hard to talk about holiness without talking about God. We're thinking about the divine, or thinking about, what else comes to mind to you when you think of holiness? If someone is telling you, hey, I really want to be holy, what do you think they're saying? What does that mean?
No, I think spiritual, like grounded and spiritual.
Grounded and spiritual, cool.
I like that better, but I usually think good.
Yeah.
People said that to me in sport, like they want to be good.
Focus more on God than on and whatever they think the ways of God are than the ways of the world. Some shopping, making money.
Right. There's the constant theme in the scriptures of in the wisdom literature about two ways: the way that leads to destruction, the way that leads to life, choosing the path of life, and so choosing God's path over the worldly path, right, is something to do. Yeah, Jackie.
From the Eastern tradition, when someone says they're Zen-like, it's like that to me, that's holiness. That whatever that peacefulness is, that is Zen.
Yeah, the Zen. There's an old leadership book. I can't remember which one it was, but about how when this is, I want to say from the late 80s, early 90s, about how if you're describing holiness from an Eastern perspective, when you're describing like a leader from an Eastern tradition, you're describing holiness. When you're describing a leader from the Western tradition, you're speaking about a good manager. That what we aspire to in our leadership in the church is great management skills. Whereas what we aspire to in the Eastern tradition is holiness. Different goals entirely.
I think of creation, just creation, that's holiness.
Say more about that. Like creation is what?
Just all of it, the whole dang thing, creation, period. I don't know.
And creation itself is holy.
Yes.
And it brings to mind holiness. So maybe how about when you're out walking in the woods?
It is all holiness. And it's 100% complete totalness.
Yeah. Do we experience it maybe more in awestruck settings in nature? You're walking in Bryce Canyon. Are you overwhelmed with holiness? Walking in the woods in Ohio.
No, but it could be the one-on-one person that love.
Yes.
If you've had that love, then that's a holiness.
Of course. But are there moments or portals where you kind of can tap into it easier, where you can see it? It's easier to see the holiness maybe in certain settings than others. In other words, is it easier to experience and feel holiness in Innis Woods than it is in a dark alley, or after the OSU football game where everybody's, cursing and yelling and drunk and angry? Is it easier to see and experience holiness in one of those settings more
Also,
than the
a
other?
newborn child's eyes.
Yes.
So creation, I don't know, it's a big word for
Creation.
me. It's a big word.
Yeah. Does anybody have an understanding of holiness, of like moral excellence?
No.
You people are amazing to me. It's astonishing. All I think of when I, what's that?
Well, I mean, it's,
Now that I've suggested it.
I mean, I think there's makes it a complicated term because like people are holy by being, moral, living life of God, being that example. But then there are people who use their moral, high ground as like cudgels or
Yeah.
a way to look down on other people.
Yeah. Karen?
I think of selflessness.
Selflessness. Being oriented towards the needs of others as opposed to being consumed with the needs of myself.
The Ten Commandments.
Ten
right
Commandments.
There, that's your moral code.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it goes across all cultures and societies. They may not have it written the same way, but basically it's there in every society.
Yeah. So Lyndall's saying that, I'll repeat, it's okay. I can hear you all. We're all okay. Only one of us has a mic. So Linda was saying the Ten Commandments bring to mind that moral code of holiness that transcends religion and geography, that a moral direction that applies to all people, regardless of background or religion. Is that right?
But is there anything holy in the Ten Commandments, except maybe the first one? That's it. Everything else is a law.
Yeah, first one is, you shall know the gods before me. And then we move on to, graven images, and not taking the Lord's name in vain, and remembering the Sabbath day, and honoring your father and mother, and not stealing, not bearing false witness, all
So
those
there's
things.
your moral excellence, but not holiness.
Say more about that too. And the distinction between moral excellence versus holiness. What do you?
Holiness, I don't need rules. I know it's spirit driven.
Mm-hmm.
And I like your word grounded. There is a sense of, there is something greater than myself that will lead me to do what it is that I'm meant to do in this world. The rules are there, yes, but they are, although they came apparently from God, human driven.
Yeah. The rules can be, and often are, human-driven, human creations. Absolutely, many of them. Lots of our rules are human creations. Then are there God-created rules too? And if so, what's the difference between following a God-honoring rule versus living into this life of grounded holiness that isn't necessarily driven by trying to meet a rule as much as it is live out the life that I've been called to live?
So I think there's a question about that though, because I think there is a case for not being so persnickety about the rules to become holier than thou.
Oh yeah.
But how far can one stray from the rules and still live in the way of the Spirit and the way of God?
That's a very good question. Because lots of so-called holy people in other traditions, in any tradition, but certainly in these Eastern traditions that maybe those of us who didn't grow up in it, there is a fetishization, there's the Beatles kind of brought in this sense, hey, these guys got it and we don't. And there's something there, but there are lots of spiritually abusive gurus who don't need the rules and so are then happy to take all of your money, have sex with whomever they want, right? So any tradition, doesn't matter what it is, East, West, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, all of them can be used for good, and all of them can be abused.
They're no longer holy at that point.
Sure, but it easily gets confused, right? We mistake the counterfeit for the real oftentimes, or many of us do. It's easy to mistake the counterfeit for the real.
I've been asked to convert because, I mean, not to another religion, Christians
Sure.
are gonna save me.
Oh, yeah.
There was somebody who used to be a really good friend of mine
Sure.
who somehow got caught up in something, and she and her husband came to save David on.
Yeah.
And especially over the interfaith thing, she said, well, if you've been trying to convert them, things
Sure.
like that. And I couldn't have anything to do with her after that.
I had a person this week reach out to me and say, if you are pushing the gay agenda, then your faith is in vain.
Okay, there you go.
I just thought, and I just wrote back, I said, thank you. Thank you, I don't remember who you are. I don't mean that as an insult, I just mean I actually don't know, I can't recall who even you are. But thank you, I pray for you. So be it. No
we
biggie.
had a charming experience. We went to that remembrance service.
Who cares?
And
Who cares what you
wow.
I'm not concerned about what this person thinks. I don't mean that in a cruel, but like, if my sense of who I am with God is contingent upon what some stranger thinks about me, then I'm not grounded, right? Then I have no roots. Then I'm completely at the whims of other people. Sorry.
So kind of to numerous of your points, for me, one of the holiest things is to be in a really great, warm, supportive community where we're all at a place where we're doing a really good job of taking care of each other and enjoying each other.
Yeah, when we are in a joyful, caring community, holiness just emerges.
Then with my elementary school background, every fall when we begin to form a new classroom community, one of the things we do is we create rules. And the purpose of the rules is because we all have to be here together. We're all here on this earth. And we're in this classroom and we're gonna be doing work together.
Yep.
So what do we agree to do? How do we agree to be so that can be as good as possible?
Yeah.
And I think when people get that, like the purpose of the rules is not the rules.
Yes.
The purpose of the rules is so that we can all be in that warm, loving, supportive, productive community.
Yeah.
That is, and I think when people reach out to you and like, oh, you're pushing the gay agenda, they're missing the point. They're looking at a line in a book instead of thinking about how do we best love each other. And you're missing the point. It's not really about the rules. The rules are for a purpose, not just, it's that salvific view of I'm only focused on the next life. I don't even care about this life. If I need to, knock you down because you're breaking some rule in the Bible so that I know I'm gonna get to heaven, then that's just the way it's gotta be.
It indicates a posture towards God. Who is God? That God would look at me or someone else and go, you got these things right, but you've got this thing wrong. Therefore, it's a very
like a criterion reference test.
yes.
It's very control focused.
Gotta get 75%, you're out of here.
or depending, much worse than that.
Sure.
Meaning, if you don't get 100%, then you're nothing. Yeah. So that's my next question. What is perfection, and how are perfection and holiness related to one another? That's another word I just want to ask you about. Again, when you hear the word perfection, or if you hear Jesus say in Matthew 5, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." When you just hear that, what does that do to your spirit? What emerges when you hear that? It sounds daunting, and Gene, you did this. Yeah. It's a bodily response. And what is that response? Describe this. What is that?
I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm down. I can respond.
Yeah.
All that.
It feels like the impossible task that is God, the Olympic coach, who will drive you so hard towards this end that you will either become one of the greatest in the world, or you will have no self-esteem, or sometimes both. You will be the best in the world and still think you're garbage. Because that's the cost of what it takes to become great, is this pursuit of perfection that is an ever It's an impossible task. Is that God, right? Is God Bella Caroli from the U.S. gymnastics teams in the 90s, right? Who loves you when you're winning the gold medal and wants nothing to do with you, and that may not be fair to him. That's the reputation that, right or wrong, his legacy carries. Is that who God is? That's what I generally hear when I hear perfection, holiness, is this unattainable standard that is absolutely impossible to achieve. And so it's also like, then why even try? Right? It's not even worth it. 1 Peter 13 through 16. Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed in his coming. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance, but just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all that you do, for it is written, be holy because I am holy. Now notice I did that whole passage, like the first part's connected to the second. I think we missed that, right? Set your hope on the grace that is going to be brought. Set your hope on the goodness, the grace that God has already revealed, that is going to reveal, the grace that is your origin point, it is your sustenance in the present, it is your destiny in your future. When you set your hope on that never-changing grace, then the call to be holy isn't a demand to measure up, but an invitation to live out the life that God has for you. A life that is for your blessing, right? A life that is meant to bring you joy. A life that is meant to allow you to flourish. Perfection, yeah, be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. I looked this up this week because I knew this, but I wanted to double check my work. Teleos is the word for perfect in Greek. And who knows what the word teleological means? Teleological. No one? What about this? Have you heard of like the telos of something? The teleology of something is its purpose, its goal, it's its direction, it's where something is headed. Right? So teleos, its first meaning is not perfection. It's something that is properly brought to its end, finished, lacking nothing necessary to completeness. So if you look up the teleology of something, it's the study of that which you are heading towards, the direction of something, the goal, the completeness. And so think how different it would sound, at least to my spirit, if we had a translator who didn't say, be perfect, therefore your Heavenly Father is perfect. But what about complete? Be complete, therefore, as your Heavenly Father is completed. That'll land differently on your spirit. Gene, I appreciate it's like, that's how it lands to me. Be perfect is like, oh, thank you, Jesus, for nothing. Like you're inviting me to do something that I can never possibly do. Whereas the invitation to be whole, be complete. The vision that I am writing out for you in the Sermon on the Mount, this vision that I'm describing to you, isn't one where you are meant to feel continually like you don't measure up, but instead, so it's not a prescription for how to live, but a description of what a life lived in the Spirit actually looks like. And when we're living from the power of the Spirit, then yeah, you're not going to want to call your brother an idiot, even if it's your football coach. You're not going to do that, right? Because why would you? Racing.
So you bring up that their completeness is an alternative translation.
It's that.
Which is, actually common, in translating between languages. But did the translation of perfection stem from the same historical processes you talked about last year, the whole Celtic Christianity and Christianity?
That's a good question. I don't know that. My understanding is that, Greek philosophical tradition is kind of where we get this notion of perfection. So if any of you have read Plato, there's this notion of the unseen world where the perfect ideals exist, right? So whatever a stool is, it is but an imitation of the ideal of the perfect stool, and everything else is but a, pale imitation of that. And so the whole of his philosophy is meant to direct us towards this perfect unseen world that we are all trying to attain towards. And I think that tradition ends up really affecting Christianity in a way that the Hebrew tradition is very different than that. The Hebrew tradition, I think, is much more towards the completeness. So where that breaks down, I don't know if that's a Roman Catholic thing or just kind of the early church thing. I don't know the answer to that. I do know the legacy of the Western Church, for sure, is one of moral excellence and lack thereof in both the Protestant and the Catholic traditions. That's across the board. So the Catholic tradition, in its perhaps less realized forms, is this, go to confession and tell the priest all the ways that you've fallen short, and then the priest is going to tell you the things that you need to do to re-enter the state of grace. Say these Hail Marys, right? Do these things. You have to attain these steps, and then you're okay. So it's a very clear equation of your goodness outweighing your badness, and the things that you do somehow contributing to that. In the Protestant world, it's different, but it's still under the same mathematics. The Protestant world drives you towards, you can never measure up, and that's the whole point of the law. The law is always there to accuse you. The law is always there to say to you what a terrible sinner you are, and God simply wants to come and bring you grace. But you never end up with the good purpose of the law. The law is always there to remind you of all the ways you fall short. You are a sinner, but you have grace in Jesus Christ. Okay, half of that's good news, but it's not unambiguously good news. So, any of you know the very famous commencement speech that David Foster Wallace gave at Kenyon College? Dusty knows it. We're just going to watch the first 2 minutes of it. David Foster Wallace, famous novelist, gave a commencement speech at Kenyon College. Highly recommend you look it up on YouTube and just look up. All you got on YouTube is "This Is Water." That's it. And this is a shortened version, a 9-minute version. We're not going to watch the whole 9 minutes of this speech that he gave at commencement at Kenyon, late 90s, early 2000s. But it begins with a great parable.
There are these 2 young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. Stated as an English sentence, of course, this is just a banal platitude. But the fact is that in the day-to-day trenches of adult existence, banal platitudes can have a life or death importance. The point.
So we can do more, but right? 2 fish swimming by each other. Young ones, old one. Old one says to the young that are passing by, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" 2 fish swim on. And one finally says the other, "Where the heck is water?" And the point of his parable, he goes on, and does his own thing with it, which is beautiful and wonderful and worthy of hearing and listening. But the whole point, as he says, that the most obvious things that affect our lives are often the hardest things to see. The things that are most true, that are sustaining our very life, that are the source and sustenance of our life, are so hard to see because we're immersed in them. What are those realities? So what the heck is water? From the Christian perspective, this is water. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. And this is the whole thing of what Jesus is doing, what God is up to. I want you to live your life completely surrounded by and sustained by this unchanging love. Abide in this love. And when you do that, then you're going to know joy. You're going to know my joy is going to be in you, your joy will be complete, and that's the whole thing. This will come up in my sermon today. You'll get a little preview of it. And you know what have you heard about the Greek word for sin is hamartia, and it means missing the mark? Familiar with this one? And so there's this question out there, is it an archery word, right? That we're supposed to be, the archer aims at the target, shoots the target, and if it's not a bullseye, you've missed the mark. You're right next to the mark, but if you're not there, you've missed the mark. So what is the mark? if that's what sin is, if sin is missing the mark, what is the mark? Well, in my growing up, in my understanding, the mark is perfection. That's the mark. So anything short of that is sin. But I think what Jesus is saying is, you've got the wrong target. The mark isn't perfection. The mark is joy. This is what you are to be aiming for. And this is all I've ever cared about for you or for anybody else, is to live your life abiding in this love, sustained by it, assured of it, not worrying about if I'm going to lose it or gain it based on what I'm doing or not doing, that my holiness is not about attaining some standard that will somehow make God pleased with me or unlock the life that I really want. The life that you really want is already here. It's the water. You don't see it. You're already sustained by this unchanging love. You miss it, right? Because we're all walking around in it. So we can't see it, we can't feel it, but it's there. Sustaining us from our first breath to our last, promising us in whatever is to come, that this is water. We flip over. Ephesians 3:16-19. I pray that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner being with power through his Spirit, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith as you are being rooted and grounded in love. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. And get your, as best as you can, what you can, but get your brain around this last line. So that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. This is the goal. To be so rooted in this unchanging divine love that your life is full of the fullness of God. Paul, at this point, is reaching for the very limits of human language. Right? He is trying to describe the indescribable. He's trying to describe a life that is completely consumed by this love. And when we are consumed by it, then we're full of the fullness of God. This is water from the Christian perspective. Now this is the starting point. So it's not a goal to be achieved. It's actually what you already have and what you already are. And then the trick is learning to trust that it's true. Right? Coming to believe that that's actually true. And not just believe it, but experiencing it. It's one thing to believe it, but it's another to experience it, to trust it, to know it. So that when life falls apart, in whatever way it falls apart, in the small ways, like dumb football games, in the big ways, like death and illness, and betrayal, heartbreak, all those things that come along and convince us that somehow maybe I've done it wrong. How many of us at some point in our life have had something bad to us that at least the thought went through our mind, what did I do to deserve this? What did I do wrong? I must have done something wrong. Okay, God, what did I do? Now, I think that's a pretty human, normal response if you've thought that way. I know I have. But what water reminds us, like you're swimming in the water. That's not the water in which you swim. It's not how this works. God isn't up there divvying out rewards and punishments based on how good we did that day. God is so consumed with this one thing, which is pouring out joy from the divine life into this beautiful created world that we might know it, experience it, feel it. This is why. I think the only understanding of holiness that makes any sense to me is one that starts in this place. And you've got to start with this absolutely fundamental truth that cannot be changed, that you are already everything God had in mind when God made you. God isn't sitting around, but I wish that Beth would just wake up 10 minutes earlier and do that meditating thing that she's been wanting to do. I've been telling her she should be doing this every day, and she's not doing it, at least not consistently enough. And once she does, then your life will be unlocked. That's not how it works, right? That's the achievement that our world is obsessed with, and God is saying, I'm not waiting around for that. All that love, all that grace, all that joy comes preloaded. It's the preloaded software of the human condition. But we don't see it, right? Because we're so neurotic.
But you can experience it.
Yeah, so how do we experience it? That is the goal of holiness then.
Joy.
Yeah.
Pure joy.
Yeah.
And when you experience that, then you know what it
Well,
is.
when do you experience? That's great. Yeah.
And it's not every moment,
No.
every day.
Yeah.
If you have it once in your life, that's great.
Yeah.
But hopefully you have it more than once.
Indeed. Yeah.
It's almost when your barriers are down.
Can you experience joy without your barriers down? I don't know that you can. Can you experience joy without your barriers down?
Yes,
Yes.
it's one of the best joy.
Yes, I agree.
That's the best.
It's the only way.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not sure it's possible. If your barriers are up, I'm not sure it's possible. Have you ever been to like a stand-up show and like the one person who refuses to laugh, like, I mean, okay, that's fine. You can do that if you want, and maybe a good reason for it. But like, why not enjoy this? Why not play along? Why not experience the joy? Stand-up's not your thing, whatever, right? The funny movie, watching some wonderful Christmas vacation with your family, and seeing Chevy Chase once again hit his face something. It's great. Why not let it make you laugh? But if you're guarded, you can't, right? I don't think you can laugh if you're not vulnerable. It's impossible. You know, if your guard is up, nothing will be funny to you. and if your guard is up and you find yourself laughing, I've had this experience where it's almost like, dang it, you always get mad because I was trying to be serious here. It's like, I know, I still got you. When in the back door, your defenses were all up here. So finding joy, I think, is the whole goal of Christian discipleship. It's not to achieve some perfection. So I had this quote on the previous page too, that I've always actually loved, but it depends what you mean by it. My people's greatest need is my personal holiness. This is a Scottish Presbyterian pastor. Now, I don't know about McShane, Scottish Presbyterian pastor, but my guess is his vision of holiness is probably more towards the moral excellence side. I'm guessing that's probably what he meant. So his congregation's greatest need was his personal holiness. I have come to love that quote, but only in this redefined way. That this church's greatest need is for me to be a whole human being. That's what you need far more than anything else, is for me to be a whole, well human being. And I think then the quote applies to everybody who's not clergy too, right? This world's greatest need is for your personal holiness as well. And if that word, and it sounded like earlier on, y'all didn't trip on it the way that I do. I trip on holiness, and I have to redefine it. So the way I do that is I put the W in front. Put the W in front of holiness, and that this is what the world needs above all else. This is what your children need. This is what your coworkers need. It's what your family needs. Is for you to be a whole person. And when we don't, that's where the joy gets blocked, right? When we don't deal with our traumas. We don't deal with our stuff, our emotional baggage, however it got to us. Then it's not that you're a bad boy or a bad girl. It's that the joy that God intends to be received and then flow through you gets blocked. Right? It gets cut off. It stops. Instead of being received by you and passed on, it gets blocked. And that's just a bummer. Right? So it's not being bad boys or bad girls. It's that the vision of this joy-filled, abundant life where we are surrounded by and sustained by the love of God, there are barriers put in that. And that's a real bummer. Right? And so instead of, as Richard Worrell used to say, instead of transforming our trauma, we transmit it. And the corollary is as if we don't transform our trauma, we inevitably transmit it.
And that's war.
And that's war. Yeah. Yeah, that's war. That's emotional war within families. That's literal war within countries and peoples. And that's not the joyful life that God has for us. So, I don't know enough about the human brain. Maybe some of you do. But I like this vision of the brain that, as I understand it, like any model, is flawed and overly simplistic. But I do think it's a helpful one. The three-part brain model. That at the base of our brain is this reptilian brain. The oldest, most ancient part of the human brain is this brain stem and cerebellum. And what it does is control the fight or flight mechanisms in our body. So when we are truly afraid and you perceive that there is an actual threat to you, and not a perceived threat, there's a real threat. This is what takes over, right? The reptilian brain. And you end up in the fight or the flight or the freeze. It's kind of the third one that you get to hear more and more about. Oldest part of our brain. The one over which we have the least amount of control. By design. It's not designed for you to go to committee and think through things. How should we deal with this threat that is currently moving at my head right at this moment? Let's send that to committee and come back with 3 ideas about what we should do. Too slow. Reptilian brain takes over and says, get you out of here, right, before you even know it. Oldest, deepest, most ancient part of our brain, reptilian brain. Mammal brain, second part of the brain. This controls the limbic systems, the emotions, memories, habits, and decisions. As I understand it, the mammalian brain starts to engage when we are still, infants. We're not quite born with it as forms, and it really starts to take shape in infancy. Is this mammalian brain that isn't just the most base, am I safe or I'm not safe, but now I can start to laugh, right? I can be sad, tears. There's emotions beyond just the most base fight or flight that we share with other mammals, right? And then the unique human contribution. The highest, and this is actually not the best, as I understand it, the neocortex is like really, really small. Like as thin as a tortilla, and just sits right here. So the most developed part of our brain, what's that?
It's part of I think the cerebrum. Cerebellum is the part of the reptile brain.
Yes.
Cerebrum is the big wrinkly part of the top.
And then the neocortex, though, yeah, frontal lobe, as I've been told, as thin as a tortilla, the most recent part of our brain in terms of human evolution. And what this does is give us language, abstract thought, imagination, consciousness. This is where our reason sits, our rationalizations. So a lot of the things that we think of what makes us human beings as opposed to golden retrievers rests in this most recent innovation that evolution has given to us, this neocortex part of our brain, where reason, rationality, language sits. Now, if you were to think of Christian discipleship, of how it is we train young people, adults, how to be better Christians, whatever we mean by that, which parts of the brain are we normally talking about in those practices, those exercises, those trainings?
What's in your cortex, which is all just you heard people that.
You think the neocortex? Yeah. Language. What do we teach children? Learn the 10 Commandments. That's language. Right? Learn the rules. Learn these truths about God. We don't have a book of confessions here. If we did, Presbyterian, PCUSA book of confessions, it is full of language. And I should have brought these with me. We have our new Book of Common Worship that I often use to help shape our services. And there is an older worship book that the Episcopals use that's called the Book of Common Prayer. Now, if we had them side by side, the Book of Common Prayer from the Episcopal tradition is about this thick. And if we had the new PCUSA version, the Book of Common Worship, it's about this thick. Why? Because Presbyterians are wordy people. Lots of language, lots of neocortex, lots of reason and rationalization.
But it doesn't stick without
What
emotions.
what good is training the neocortex if you have not taught the mammalian brain that it's safe, that it's cherished? Actually taught the reptilian brain that it's safe, taught the mammalian brain that it's cherished, that it's beloved. What good is it? It's not that neocortex training is necessarily bad. I think we've just gotten it out of order. I think we started with the most advanced part of human brain development when it comes to holiness or Christian discipleship, growth in Christian faith, however you want to describe it. We've started there, and what we actually need to do is to invert that entirely. We need to start with the reptilian brain, move up towards the mammalian brain, and after we've done that for 20 years, maybe we can get to finally talking about things. Tori.
I would argue that where education, both our Christian education and education in general, may have fallen short over the years, is we have failed to help folks understand how these three areas of the brain interact.
Yeah.
Like for me, I'm not sure we need to pick a spot and start there.
Yeah.
But I think we could pick any spot,
Yeah,
as long as we're mindful and helping learners, including ourselves, because we're always learning as we're teaching, to understand how each part of the brain might interact in a given situation.
yes.
So like,
You're so good at this.
You know,
I need that. So
look around you, are you safe?
Yeah.
You know, and if somebody you had a fight with last week is in the room, maybe you don't feel super safe.
Yeah.
But maybe there's something you can do about it.
And what you're describing from hearing you, right, Tori, is that there actually is no way to talk about one without the other. Meaning these are all, you're one person. You're not, we don't deal with your body, and now we're like, that's not how it works. But what they are is different angles to talk about the unique, multi-sided you that is you. and we need to address all of those sides. So when you're addressing the needs of the human body, that is also going to affect your neocortex. And you can help take care of the needs of the body by talking to the neocortex. We're doing it right now. I'm talking to you. That's right. So we're using the neocortex to talk about these other things. So none of them are dealt with in isolation. They are all, to use the fancy philosophical term, perspectival. Right? To look at one is ultimately to look at the other. They are, it's the gem, right? Looking at a gem and through one facet of each side. But as I said, I worry that our tradition has largely dealt with what I call top-down discipleship. If we give people the right thoughts, the right theology, the right rules, memorize these Bible verses. There are portions of my life where I memorized the entire book of Ephesians, verse 1 to the end. Just all of it. And I just thought, if I can just get enough of this in my brain to know it, then I'll be holy. Then I'll stop sinning in all these ways that God is so upset with me for sinning. Did it stop my sinning? No. Do I regret memorizing? No. But it's just not complete. So what we're going to do next week is talk about ways that we can be whole in all three parts of these brain features. What does it mean to love God with our neocortex? What does it mean to love God with our mammalian brain or reptilian brain? Or, we want to break that down into more Jesus language. We've got the Luke 10 passage. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? Jesus replied, how do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly. Jesus replied, do this, and you'll live. Does anybody know what the very next part of the story is? the guy says, then who's my neighbor? And Jesus says, oh, let me tell you a story about that. He tells the story of what we call the Good Samaritan. So even in this rational neocortex discussion, when the guy's saying, what does it then mean? How do I actually do this? Jesus tells a story. Now, is that involving your neocortex? Yes. But storytelling is about getting to those deeper parts, right? It's getting to your affections. It's getting to your emotions, not just dealing with your reason. Because if we just deal with God and our reason, we're never going to get there. So, what I'm going to do next week is to look at 3 aspects: body, mind, and spirit. And none of them are, like, what's the distinction between a spirit and a soul? I don't know. It's not that well thought out. But there are 3 different perspectives to look at the human person: our bodily needs, the needs of our mind, and then the needs of our spirit, heart, however you want to look at it, seat of your affections. And there are different practices we can do to have, I think, a more well-rounded discipleship that makes us holy with the devil. That's what I mean. Thank you all.